Picture this. You're sitting in your boss's office, being offered the promotion you've dreamed of for 3 years. Corner office, 6-figure salary, your own team. There's just one tiny catch. You have to destroy the career of the woman who saved yours. The woman who believed in you when nobody else would. The woman who taught you that integrity isn't just a word you put on corporate value posters. That woman was my mentor. And when I said no, they called me disloyal. When I walked away from their blood money, they fired me on the spot. But here's what they didn't know. I had been recording everything for weeks. Every conversation, every threat, every corrupt deal they thought nobody would ever discover. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and this is the story of how choosing loyalty over a paycheck cost me everything and gave me something even better. This is about the day I learned that sometimes being disloyal to the wrong people is the most loyal thing you can do for yourself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning air in downtown Seattle carried the usual mix of coffee and possibility as I walked through the glass doors of Premier Analytics for what I thought would be the best day of my professional life. The lobby's polished marble reflected the early sunshine streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and I could feel my heartbeat quickening with anticipation. After 18 months of grinding through spreadsheets, client presentations, and endless late nights, I was finally about to present the breakthrough that would change everything. My heels clicked confidently across the marble as I headed toward the executive floor, clutching my leather portfolio that contained the research proposal that had consumed my life for the past 6 months. This wasn't just any proposal. This was the kind of game-changing strategy that gets you noticed, promoted, and remembered. The kind that transforms a junior analyst into a rising star. I had spent the previous evening rehearsing my presentation in my tiny Capitol Hill apartment, practicing every gesture and inflection in front of my bathroom mirror, while my rescue cat Oliver watched with what I hoped was approval. The numbers were undeniable, the strategy was brilliant, and the potential revenue impact was massive. Everything I had learned from my mentor, Dr. Patricia Chen, had led to this moment. Patricia had been my guiding light since my first terrifying day at Premier Analytics. Fresh out of the University of Washington with my business degree, I had been drowning in the fast-paced world of corporate consulting until she took me under her wing. She was everything I aspired to be, sharp, principled, and respected by everyone who worked with her. More importantly, she had taught me that success without integrity was just elaborate failure disguised in expensive suits. The elevator hummed quietly as it carried me to the 32nd floor, where the executive conference room waited. Through the glass walls, I could see the setup was perfect. The projector was ready, my presentation was loaded, and 3 chairs sat arranged around the polished conference table. CEO Marcus Sullivan would be there, along with Chief Strategy Officer Rachel Kim and Head of Business Development James Mitchell. These were the people who held my future in their hands, and I was ready to prove I deserved their confidence. I arranged my notes one final time and checked my appearance in the reflection of the window. My navy blazer was crisp, my dark hair was pulled back in a professional bun, and my grandmother's pearl earrings added just the right touch of elegance. I looked like someone who belonged in that room, someone who had earned her place at the table through hard work and brilliance. The conference room smelled like expensive coffee and leather chairs, the kind of atmosphere that whispered success and power. I had arrived 15 minutes early, partly from nerves and partly from the lesson Patricia had drilled into me about the importance of preparation. She always said that showing up early wasn't just about punctuality, it was about taking control of your environment and your narrative. Marcus Sullivan entered first, his silver hair perfectly styled and his custom suit screaming authority. Behind him came Rachel Kim, her designer heels clicking authoritatively against the polished floor, and James Mitchell, whose nervous energy seemed to fill the room immediately. But something felt wrong. The congratulatory smiles I had expected were nowhere to be found. Instead, their faces carried an expression I couldn't quite read but definitely didn't like. Rachel took her seat without making eye contact, immediately opening her laptop and focusing intently on the screen as if the most important email in the world had just arrived. James fidgeted with his pen, clicking it repeatedly in a rhythm that seemed designed to create maximum anxiety. Marcus settled into his chair with the kind of deliberate slowness that suggested this meeting would not go as I had planned. The air in the room felt thick with unspoken tension, and my carefully rehearsed confidence began to waver. This was supposed to be my moment of triumph, the presentation that would validate 18 months of sacrifices and sleepless nights. Instead, it felt like I had walked into a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. Marcus finally spoke, his voice carrying none of the warmth I had experienced during our previous interactions. "Emma, before we discuss your research proposal, we need to address some serious concerns that have come to our attention regarding your work relationship with Dr. Chen." The words hit me like a physical blow. This meeting wasn't about my breakthrough research. This wasn't about my promotion or my future or any of the dreams I had carried into this room. This was about Patricia, and somehow, I was being dragged into whatever storm was brewing around her. "I'm not sure I understand," I managed to say, though my voice sounded smaller than I intended. "Dr. Chen has been an excellent mentor, and our collaboration has always been completely professional." Rachel finally looked up from her laptop, her expression cold and calculating. "That's precisely the problem, Emma. Your relationship with Dr. Chen has compromised your objectivity and your loyalty to this company. We've been monitoring some concerning patterns in her work, and we need to know whether you've been aware of her activities." The room seemed to shrink around me as the implications of her words began to sink in. They weren't just questioning my work or my judgment. They were asking me to turn against the woman who had made my career possible. The woman who had taught me everything I knew about analytics, about business, and about maintaining integrity in a world that constantly tested it. James leaned forward, his nervous energy now focused into what felt like predatory intensity. "Dr. Chen has been conducting unauthorized research using company resources. She's been sharing proprietary methodologies with outside contacts, and she's been building relationships with our clients that extend beyond appropriate professional boundaries. We have documentation of these violations, and we need to know what you've observed during your time working with her." I felt the blood drain from my face as I processed what they were suggesting. Patricia Chen was the most ethical person I had ever worked with. She was meticulous about following protocols, transparent about her research, and scrupulous about maintaining professional boundaries. The idea that she would engage in any kind of misconduct was not just unlikely, it was impossible. "I've never observed anything inappropriate in Dr. Chen's work," I said firmly, finding my voice again. "She's always been completely professional and ethical in everything I've seen her do." Marcus's expression hardened, and I realized this wasn't a fishing expedition. This was a trap, and I was walking straight into it. "Emma, we're offering you an opportunity to demonstrate your loyalty to Premier Analytics. Dr. Chen's methods may have seemed acceptable to you, but they represent serious violations of company policy and potentially federal regulations. We need detailed documentation of her activities, her client interactions, and her research methodologies." The request hung in the air like poison gas, and I struggled to understand how this conversation had veered so far from what I had expected. 20 minutes ago, I had been preparing to present research that would advance my career and prove my value to the company. Now I was being asked to spy on my mentor and build a case against the woman who had believed in me when I was just another confused graduate trying to find her place in the corporate world. "I'm not comfortable providing that kind of documentation," I said carefully, trying to navigate between honesty and diplomacy. "Dr. Chen has always conducted herself professionally, and I don't believe there's anything to document." Rachel's laugh was sharp and humorless. Emma, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. This isn't a request. This is an opportunity for you to prove that your loyalty lies with Premier Analytics rather than with an individual who may have compromised your judgment. Dr. Chen's position here is already in jeopardy. The question is whether you want to go down with her or whether you want to secure your own future. The threat was clear now, wrapped in corporate speak but unmistakable in its implications. They wanted me to choose between my mentor and my career, between integrity and advancement, between the woman who had shaped my professional identity and the company that employed us both. It wasn't really a choice at all, because choosing against Patricia would mean choosing against everything she had taught me about what it meant to be a professional. James pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table toward me. This is a formal request for your cooperation in documenting Dr. Chen's activities. We're prepared to offer you significant incentives for your assistance. A promotion to senior analyst, a substantial salary increase, and your own research team. All you need to do is provide us with detailed observations about her client relationships, her research methods, and any conversations you've had about company policies. I stared at the folder without touching it, understanding that opening it would represent a point of no return. Inside those pages was probably everything I had worked toward since joining Premier Analytics. The promotion I had dreamed about, the salary that would finally allow me to pay off my student loans and move out of my cramped apartment, the recognition that would establish me as a rising star in the industry. But accepting it would mean betraying the woman who had made all of it possible. It would mean becoming the kind of person who traded loyalty for advancement, who sacrificed relationships for profit, who chose personal gain over professional integrity. It would mean becoming everything Patricia had taught me not to be. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I need time to think about this, I said finally, though I already knew what my answer would be. I needed time to figure out how to navigate this situation without destroying either my career or my conscience. Marcus stood up, his movements carrying the weight of authority and implied threat. You have until tomorrow morning to decide, Emma, but understand that your response will determine not just your future at Premier Analytics, but your reputation in this industry. Dr. Chen's career is already over. The question is whether you're smart enough to save your own. They filed out of the conference room, leaving me alone with the manila folder and the ruins of everything I had believed about my professional life. The presentation I had prepared sat forgotten on the table, its brilliant insights and breakthrough recommendations suddenly irrelevant in the face of this moral crisis. I sat in the empty conference room for a long time, staring out at the Seattle skyline and trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. This morning, I had been a promising young analyst on the verge of a major breakthrough. Now I was being asked to choose between my future and my soul, between advancement and integrity, between the company that employed me and the woman who had made me who I was. The manila folder seemed to mock me from across the table, representing everything I thought I wanted and everything I knew I couldn't accept. Inside those pages was a future built on betrayal, success purchased with someone else's destruction, advancement that would cost me everything I valued about myself. I thought about Patricia, probably sitting in her office at that very moment, unaware that her protégé was being recruited to build the case against her. I thought about all the lessons she had taught me, all the conversations we had shared about integrity and professionalism and the importance of doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. I thought about the woman who had seen potential in a nervous graduate student and had invested her time and energy in helping me become someone worth believing in. The choice was clear, even if the consequences weren't. I picked up the manila folder and walked out of the conference room without opening it. Some opportunities aren't worth taking. Some prices are too high to pay. Some loyalties are more important than any promotion. As I walked back to my desk, I realized that this was just the beginning. They had revealed their hand, but they didn't. No, I had been documenting everything for weeks. They didn't know about the recordings on my phone, the emails I had saved, the conversations I had witnessed that painted a very different picture of who was really violating company policies. They thought they were trapping me, but they had actually given me the evidence I needed to expose the truth. They wanted my loyalty, but they had just proven they didn't deserve it. They had asked me to choose between my mentor and my career, never imagining that I might choose something else entirely. I might choose justice. The walk back to my cubicle felt like a death march through a corporate cemetery. Every colleague I passed seemed to avoid eye contact, their conversations dying to whispers as I approached. The open office layout that usually buzzed with collaborative energy now felt like a fishbowl where I was the main attraction, swimming in circles while predators circled overhead. My hands trembled slightly as I settled into my ergonomic chair, the same chair where I had spent countless hours perfecting the research proposal that was now gathering dust in an abandoned conference room. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was sitting in the exact spot where Patricia had first approached me 18 months ago, transforming my flailing career into something meaningful and purposeful. The manila folder sat on my desk like a venomous snake, its beige surface hiding what I knew would be career-defining poison. Around me, the familiar sounds of corporate life continued their relentless rhythm. Phones rang with urgent client calls, keyboards clicked with the staccato beat of deadlines, and the coffee machine hummed its constant promise of caffeinated salvation. But underneath it all, I could sense something darker, a current of whispered conversations and meaningful glances that suggested I wasn't the only one who knew something was happening. My computer screen displayed the PowerPoint presentation I had crafted with such care, its charts and graphs now seeming naive and optimistic. The research that had consumed my evenings and weekends for months suddenly felt trivial compared to the moral earthquake that had just shattered my professional world. I closed the file without saving the final changes, understanding that this presentation would never see the light of day, at least not in the way I had imagined. The first sign that word was already spreading came from Jennifer Walsh, a junior analyst who worked 2 cubicles away from mine. She approached with the cautious energy of someone delivering bad news, her usually bright demeanor replaced by nervous concern. "Emma," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Are you okay? People are saying there was some kind of meeting with the executives this morning, and you looked pretty shaken when you came back." I managed what I hoped was a reassuring smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "Just some unexpected feedback on my research proposal. Nothing I can't handle." Jennifer nodded, but her expression suggested she wasn't buying my casual dismissal. "If you need to talk about anything, you know I'm here, right? I mean, we all know how much Dr. Chen has helped you, and if something's happening with her." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The implication was clear. Rumors were already circulating about Patricia, and somehow my name was being connected to whatever storm was brewing. I thanked Jennifer for her concern and watched her retreat to her own workspace, but not before I noticed her stealing glances back in my direction. The rest of the morning passed in a surreal haze of ordinary tasks, performed against an extraordinary backdrop of dread. I answered emails about routine client updates while my mind raced through the implications of the morning's confrontation. I participated in a conference call about quarterly projections, while wondering if I would still have a job to worry about quarterly projections by the end of the week. I reviewed budget allocations while calculating the financial impact of unemployment and the emotional cost of betrayal. Lunch hour arrived like a temporary reprieve from a siege. The office gradually emptied as colleagues escaped to their usual restaurants and cafes, leaving behind a quieter atmosphere that somehow felt more oppressive than the morning's bustle. I had no appetite for food, but I needed to move, to think, to find some space between the suffocating walls of corporate pressure and moral compromise. I decided to walk to Pike Place Market, partly because the crowds and chaos would provide anonymity, and partly because the authentic humanity of the place might help me remember who I was underneath the business suits and professional expectations. The Seattle streets were alive with their usual midday energy, tourists navigating around locals, street musicians competing with traffic noise, and the eternal dance of urban life continuing regardless of the personal dramas unfolding in glass towers above. The market's sensory overload provided temporary relief from the morning's psychological assault. Fish vendors called out their daily specials while customers examined gleaming salmon and halibut. Flower stalls exploded with color and fragrance, their beauty a stark contrast to the sterile corporate environment I had escaped. Artisan booths displayed handcrafted jewelry and pottery, each piece representing someone's creative passion and authentic expression. I found myself drawn to a small coffee stand run by an elderly man whose weathered hands moved with the practiced efficiency of decades spent perfecting his craft. His espresso machine was an ancient beast of brass and steam, and the coffee he produced was rich and complex in a way that made Starbucks seem like flavored water. As I sipped the dark brew, I thought about authenticity and craftsmanship, about the satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful rather than just profitable. The coffee vendor noticed my contemplative mood and struck up the kind of casual conversation that strangers sometimes share when they recognize a kindred spirit in distress. He told me about his 40 years in the coffee business, about watching Seattle transform from a sleepy port town into a tech metropolis, about the customers who had become friends and the friends who had become family. His stories were filled with the kind of genuine human connections that Patricia had always emphasized in her approach to business, relationships built on trust and mutual respect rather than transactions and exploitation. "You look like someone wrestling with a difficult decision," he observed as he cleaned his espresso machine with meticulous care. "Not sure if it's my place to say, but sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that define who we really are." His words hit me with unexpected force, crystallizing something I had been struggling to articulate all morning. This wasn't just about my career or my relationship with Patricia, or even my future at Premier Analytics. This was about the fundamental question of who I wanted to be, what I was willing to compromise, and what principles were worth defending regardless of the cost. I thanked the coffee vendor for his wisdom and his excellent espresso, then began the walk back to the office with a clearer sense of purpose. The manila folder was still waiting on my desk, but its power to intimidate me had diminished. I understood now that the choice I was facing wasn't really a choice at all. It was a test of character, and I had been preparing for this test my entire professional life without realizing it. The afternoon brought a steady stream of interruptions that felt increasingly orchestrated. Rachel Kim stopped by my cubicle to ask about the status of a client report that wasn't due for another week. James Mitchell sent an email requesting my input on a project I had never worked on. Marcus Sullivan's assistant called to schedule a follow-up meeting for the next morning, her tone professional but somehow ominous. Each interaction carried the subtle weight of surveillance, as if they were monitoring my reactions and measuring my commitment to their agenda. I responded to each request with professional courtesy while documenting every conversation in a notebook I kept hidden in my desk drawer. Something told me that accurate records might become important in ways I couldn't yet anticipate. The most troubling moment came late in the afternoon when I noticed two men in expensive suits having an intense conversation near the elevator bank. They weren't employees of Premier Analytics, and their presence felt distinctly out of place in our usually insular corporate environment. One of them was taking notes while the other gestured toward the section of the office where Patricia's corner office was located. They stayed for about 20 minutes, during which time I observed several senior executives making trips to that area of the building. When Patricia finally returned from her own lunch meeting, the change in her demeanor was immediately obvious. The confident stride that usually characterized her movement through the office had been replaced by something more cautious, more defensive. Her usual warm greetings to colleagues were subdued, and the smile that typically lit up her face when she saw me was strained and worried. She stopped by my cubicle with the pretense of discussing a routine project update. but her real message was delivered in lowered tones that wouldn't carry to nearby workstations. "Emma, I need you to be very careful about any unusual requests or conversations you might have today," she said quietly, her eyes scanning the office to make sure we weren't being observed. "There are some things happening that I can't fully explain right now, but I want you to know that whatever you might hear about me in the coming days, it's not what it appears to be." The warning sent a chill down my spine, confirming my worst fears about the morning's confrontation. Patricia was clearly aware that she was under investigation, and she was trying to protect me from getting caught in the crossfire. Her concern for my welfare, even in the face of her own professional crisis, only reinforced my conviction that betraying her would be morally indefensible. "Is there anything I can do to help?" I asked, keeping my voice equally low. Patricia's smile was sad but genuine. "Just remember everything I've taught you about integrity and doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by people who choose principle over profit, and I have a feeling you're going to face that choice sooner than either of us would like." She squeezed my shoulder gently and walked away, leaving me with the unsettling certainty that this might be one of our last normal conversations. The weight of her trust in me felt both inspiring and terrifying, a responsibility I wasn't sure I was ready to carry but knew I couldn't abandon. The end of the workday arrived with unusual swiftness, as if time itself was eager to escape the toxic atmosphere that had settled over the office. As colleagues began their evening exodus, I remained at my desk, ostensibly finishing up routine tasks, but actually trying to process the emotional whiplash of the past 8 hours. The manila folder still sat unopened, its contents a mystery I had no intention of solving. My phone buzzed with a text message from my college roommate Sarah, who was now working as a public defender in Portland. "Coffee this weekend? I have some crazy stories from the courthouse that will make your corporate drama seem boring." The message was innocuous enough, but it reminded me that there were people in my life who had chosen careers built on fighting for justice rather than maximizing profit. People who faced moral challenges every day and chose to stand up for what was right regardless of the personal cost. As I gathered my belongings and prepared to leave, I noticed that the lights in Patricia's office were still on, casting a warm glow against the darkening Seattle sky outside her windows. Through the glass walls, I could see her sitting at her desk, surrounded by papers and files, her usually perfect posture slightly slumped with exhaustion or worry. The image of her working alone while facing professional destruction struck me as profoundly unfair. A brilliant and ethical professional being sacrificed to corporate politics and bureaucratic ambition. The elevator ride down to the parking garage was a solitary journey through 32 floors of decision and consequence. Each floor that passed represented another step away from the world where I had spent the last 18 months, building what I thought was a promising career. By the time the doors opened onto the concrete and fluorescent lighting of the underground garage, I felt like I was emerging into a different universe, one where the rules I had lived by were no longer sufficient to navigate the challenges ahead. My drive home through Seattle's evening traffic provided a cocoon of private space where I could finally let my professional mask slip and confront the raw emotions that had been building all day. The familiar route through Capitol Hill took me past coffee shops where Patricia and I had shared countless mentoring conversations, restaurants where we had celebrated project completions and career milestones, bookstores where she had recommended titles that expanded my understanding of business ethics and professional responsibility. Each landmark triggered memories of the woman who had transformed my understanding of what it meant to be a professional, who had taught me that success without integrity was just elaborate failure, who had shown me that the most important relationships in business were built on trust and mutual respect rather than strategic advantage and calculated manipulation. The idea of betraying her felt not just morally wrong, but personally devastating, like cutting out a piece of my own professional identity. My apartment building's lobby felt like a sanctuary after the day's emotional assault. The familiar smell of Mrs. Patterson's cooking from the second floor, the sound of the Johnson kids playing in the courtyard, the gentle hum of ordinary life, continuing its natural rhythm, all served to remind me that there was a world beyond corporate politics and professional ambition, a world where relationships mattered more than quarterly reports and human decency trumped strategic advantage. Oliver greeted me with the kind of enthusiastic affection that only cats can provide when they sense their human needs comfort. His purring presence as I changed out of my business attire and into comfortable clothes provided a grounding force that helped me transition from the role of corporate analyst to the more fundamental identity of person trying to do the right thing in a complicated world. I spent the evening sitting on my small balcony, looking out over the city lights and trying to imagine what my life would look like in 24 hours. The manila folder sat on my coffee table, still unopened, still representing a future I couldn't bring myself to embrace. Around me, Seattle continued its nightly transformation from business center to living community, office lights giving way to residential warmth, the energy of productivity replaced by the quieter rhythms of family dinners and evening relaxation. The weight of the decision I faced felt enormous, but the path forward was becoming increasingly clear. I thought about the coffee vendor's words about difficult choices defining who we really are, about Patricia's lessons on integrity and principle, about the kind of person I wanted to be when the stakes were highest and the pressure was most intense. I thought about my college roommate fighting for justice in Portland courtrooms, and my grandmother's stories about standing up for what was right, even when it cost her personally. By the time I went to bed that night, I knew what my answer would be. The manila folder would remain unopened, its promises of advancement and security rejected in favor of something more valuable and more lasting. I would not betray the woman who had made my career possible. I would not compromise the principles that defined my professional identity, and I would not trade my integrity for any amount of money or status. The decision brought a sense of peace that surprised me with its intensity. For the first time since walking into that conference room, I felt like myself again, like the person Patricia had seen potential in and had invested her time and energy in developing. I was about to face the consequences of choosing principle over profit, but at least I would face them as someone I could respect, someone whose reflection I could meet in the mirror without flinching. Sleep came more easily than I had expected, carrying with it dreams of coffee vendors and fish markets, of honest work and authentic relationships, of a world where doing the right thing was its own reward, and where integrity was valued more than quarterly earnings. When I woke the next morning, I was ready to face whatever consequences my choice would bring, secure in the knowledge that I had chosen to be the person Patricia had taught me to be. The manila folder sat on my coffee table like yesterday's newspaper, already obsolete and irrelevant to the story I was choosing to write with my life. The morning alarm felt like a war cry piercing through the fog of a dream where everything made sense and people acted with basic human decency. Reality crashed back with the weight of concrete as I realized that today was the day I would have to look Marcus Sullivan in the eye and tell him that his corrupt little scheme would have to find another willing participant. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed someone who had aged a decade overnight. Stress etched in the lines around my eyes and tension pulling at the corners of my mouth. Oliver watched with feline wisdom as I selected my armor for the day. The navy blue suit that had made me feel powerful and confident just 48 hours ago now felt like a costume for a role I no longer wanted to play. But Patricia had taught me that professional appearance was a form of respect, both for yourself and for the people you worked with. So I dressed with the same care I had always taken, even though I suspected this might be one of the last times I would wear these clothes to Premier Analytics. The drive through Seattle's morning traffic provided a rhythm of stop and go that matched my internal state of nervous anticipation. Radio hosts chatted about weekend plans and traffic updates while my mind rehearsed the conversation that would determine the trajectory of my professional life. The city was waking up around me, coffee shops opening their doors to the first wave of caffeine seekers, buses loading with commuters who believed they were heading to just another ordinary day. At the office, the Premier Analytics building looked different somehow. its glass facade reflecting the morning sun with what seemed like artificial brightness, as if the structure itself was putting on a performance of corporate respectability, while housing the kind of ethical rot that I was about to confront. The security guard in the lobby offered his usual friendly greeting, completely unaware that he was witnessing what might be my final entrance into a world I had worked so hard to join. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt like ascending to my own execution, each floor marking another step closer to the moment when I would have to choose between everything I had worked for and everything I believed in. The manila folder was still sitting on my desk where I had left it the previous evening, its beige surface somehow more ominous in the harsh fluorescent light of morning. I didn't touch it, didn't even look at it directly, but its presence dominated my peripheral vision like a ticking bomb. Patricia arrived at her usual time, her professional composure intact, but her eyes carrying the weight of someone who knew she was fighting for her career and possibly her reputation. She moved through the office with the same grace and confidence that had first impressed me 18 months ago. But now I could see the effort it required, the way she had to consciously maintain her bearing while under siege from forces she couldn't openly acknowledge or fight. Our brief eye contact across the open office space carried volumes of unspoken communication. Her slight nod seemed to say that she understood I was facing my own battle. Her encouraging smile suggested that she had faith in my character, and the sadness in her expression acknowledged that we were both caught in a situation that neither of us had created, but both of us would have to navigate with whatever dignity we could maintain. The morning hours crawled by with the relentless pace of a death march. Every phone call could be the one summoning me to Marcus's office. Every email notification might contain instructions for my moral capitulation. Every footstep in the hallway could belong to someone coming to escort me to the conference room where I would be expected to sign my name to Patricia's professional destruction. Jennifer Walsh stopped by my cubicle again, this time with coffee and the kind of concerned expression that suggested she had heard more rumors overnight. "Emma, I don't know what's going on, but people are talking about some kind of investigation involving Dr. Chen. Are you okay? You look like you haven't slept." I accepted the coffee gratefully, using the warm cup as something to focus on besides the growing dread in my stomach. "Thanks for caring, Jen. I really appreciate it. Things are just complicated right now." She nodded knowingly, glancing around to make sure our conversation wasn't being monitored. "Look, I know we don't know each other super well, but Dr. Chen helped me too when I first started here. If something bad is happening to her, it's not right. She's the most honest person in this entire building." The validation of my own feelings about Patricia's character felt like a lifeline in an ocean of corporate manipulation. Jennifer wasn't the only one who had benefited from Patricia's mentorship and guidance. Over the past 18 months, I had watched her help dozens of junior employees, always with patience and genuine interest in their development, never expecting anything in return except their commitment to doing excellent work with integrity. "She taught me that success means more than just hitting your numbers," Jennifer continued, her voice growing more confident as she spoke. "She taught me that how you treat people matters, that relationships are more important than transactions, and that your reputation is built on thousands of small choices to do the right thing, even when no one is watching." The irony was devastating. Patricia was being investigated for ethical violations by people who wouldn't recognize genuine ethics if they were printed on their business cards in gold leaf. She was being persecuted for the very qualities that made her an exceptional professional and human being, while her accusers represented everything that was wrong with corporate culture in the 21st century. My phone buzzed with the message I had been dreading all morning. "Please report to the executive conference room at 10:30 a.m., M. Sullivan's office." The timestamp showed 10:15, giving me exactly 15 minutes to prepare for what would undoubtedly be the most important conversation of my professional life. 15 minutes to rehearse my defense of principles that shouldn't need defending, to steel myself for consequences that shouldn't be necessary, to prepare for a battle that should never have been started. I stood up from my desk with what I Hoped looked like confidence rather than the queasy determination that was actually driving my movements. The manila folder remained untouched, and I had every intention of leaving it that way. Some documents were meant to remain unopened, some offers were meant to be refused, and some lines were meant to never be crossed. The walk to the executive conference room felt like a journey through a corporate museum dedicated to the worship of profit over principle. Awards and plaques lined the hallways, celebrating achievements and recognitions that suddenly seemed hollow and meaningless. Photographs of company events showed smiling faces and handshakes that now looked like elaborate performances designed to hide the moral vacuum at the heart of the organization. Marcus Sullivan was already seated at the conference table when I arrived, his posture and expression radiating the kind of authority that people in his position often mistook for righteousness. Rachel Kim sat to his right, her laptop open and fingers poised over the keyboard as if she was preparing to document my submission for future reference. James Mitchell occupied the chair across from them, his nervous energy more pronounced than ever, suggesting that he understood the gravity of what they were asking me to do. "Emma," Marcus began without preamble, "I trust you've had time to review the materials we provided yesterday and consider the opportunity we're offering you." I remained standing, partly because no one had invited me to sit, and partly because I felt stronger on my feet. "I've given your request very careful consideration, Mr. Sullivan." Rachel looked up from her laptop, her expression expectant and slightly predatory. "Excellent. We're eager to hear about your observations regarding Dr. Chen's activities. The documentation you provide will be crucial to our investigation." The moment had arrived. Everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed to build, everything I had dreamed about achieving was balanced on the knife's edge of this conversation. On one side was the promise of advancement, security, and success within the system I had spent 18 months learning to navigate. On the other side was the woman who had made that success possible, and the principles she had taught me about what success actually meant. "I won't be providing any documentation about Dr. Chen's activities," I said clearly, my voice carrying more strength than I had expected. "And I won't be accepting your offer." The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel's fingers froze. Above her keyboard, James stopped fidgeting with his pen, and Marcus's confident expression transformed into something much colder and more dangerous. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees as the implications of my refusal settled into their collective consciousness. "I'm sorry," Marcus said slowly, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had heard. "Did you just refuse? A direct request from the senior leadership of this company." "I refuse to participate in what appears to be a coordinated effort to destroy the reputation of the most ethical person I've ever worked with," I replied, maintaining eye contact, despite the intimidation radiating from across the table. "Dr. Chen has never violated any company policies, and she certainly hasn't engaged in any unethical behavior. What you're asking me to do is wrong, and I won't be part of it." Rachel's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Emma, I think you're misunderstanding the situation here. This isn't a negotiation. This isn't a request you can simply decline. This is a directive from the leadership of Premier Analytics, and your compliance is not optional." The mask was coming off now, revealing the true nature of the people who had been masquerading as professional executives. The pretense of offering me an opportunity had been abandoned in favor of the raw exercise of power and intimidation. They weren't asking for my cooperation anymore. They were demanding my submission. "Dr. Chen's methods are outdated and potentially problematic," James added, his voice carrying a wheedling quality that suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as me. "The relationships she builds with clients cross appropriate boundaries, and her research methodologies don't follow current best practices. We're not asking you to fabricate anything, just to document what you've observed." "I've observed 18 months of exemplary professional behavior," I shot back, feeling my anger building despite my efforts to remain calm. I've observed someone who treats clients with respect and genuine interest in their success. I've observed research that is thorough, ethical, and innovative. I've observed mentorship that has transformed not just my career, but the careers of dozens of other junior employees. If that's what you consider problematic, then maybe the problem isn't with Dr. Chen. Marcus stood up, his movement deliberate and threatening. Emma, you seem to be under the impression that you have a choice in this matter. Let me clarify the situation for you. Dr. Chen is going to be terminated, with or without your cooperation. The only question is whether you're going to be smart enough to save your own career, or whether you're going to go down with her. The threat was out in the open now, no longer disguised as corporate policy or professional necessity. They were asking me to choose between my loyalty to Patricia and my future at Premier Analytics, between my integrity and my career, between doing the right thing and doing the profitable thing. The choice was clear, even if the consequences were terrifying. Then I guess I'm going down with her, I said quietly, surprised by how calm I felt now that the moment of truth had finally arrived. Because the kind of success that requires betraying the people who helped you achieve it isn't success at all. It's just elaborate failure dressed up in expensive suits. Rachel slammed her laptop shut with enough force to make everyone in the Kaosai room jump. You're making a serious mistake, Emma. Do you have any idea how difficult it will be for you to find another position in this industry after word gets out about your disloyalty to Premier Analytics? My loyalty was never to Premier Analytics, I replied, feeling a strange sense of liberation in finally speaking the truth. My loyalty was to the principles that Dr. Chen taught me, principles that apparently have no place in this organization anymore. If that makes me unemployable in this industry, then maybe I need to find a different industry. Marcus moved closer, his physical presence intended to intimidate and overwhelm. You're throwing away everything you've worked for. The promotion, the salary increase, the team leadership position we discussed, all of it, gone, because you're too naive to understand how business really works. I understand exactly how business really works, I said, standing my ground despite his attempt at physical intimidation. I understand that you're trying to eliminate someone who threatens your vision of what this company should be. I understand that you want to replace authentic relationship building with superficial networking and replace ethical research with whatever methodology produces the results you want to see. I understand that you view employees as disposable resources rather than human beings with principles and integrity. And I understand that you think you can buy my cooperation with promises of advancement and threaten my compliance with professional destruction. James was sweating now. His nervous energy transformed into visible anxiety. Emma, please reconsider. We're trying to help you here. Dr. Chen's career is already over. Don't sacrifice your future for someone who can't be saved. The plea in his voice revealed the desperation underlying their aggressive tactics. They needed my cooperation more than they were willing to admit, which meant that Patricia's position was stronger than they had led me to believe. My refusal to participate in their scheme was forcing them to reveal the weakness of their case and the questionable nature of their methods. Dr. Chen doesn't need saving, I said firmly. She needs someone willing to stand up for the truth, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Rachel stood up abruptly, her professional composure finally cracking under the pressure of my continued resistance. Fine, you want to be a martyr? You want to sacrifice your career for some misguided sense of loyalty? Go ahead. But don't expect any sympathy when you're unemployed and unemployable. I don't expect sympathy, I replied calmly. I expect to be able to look at myself in the mirror and respect the person I see there. That's worth more than any salary or promotion you could offer. Marcus moved back to his position behind the conference table, his expression now openly hostile. Clean out your desk, Emma. Your employment with Premier Analytics is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building, and you'll receive information about your final paycheck and benefits continuation in the mail. The finality of his words should have been devastating, but instead, I felt an unexpected surge of relief. The decision had been made, the consequences were clear, and I no longer had to navigate the treacherous waters of corporate politics and moral compromise. I was free to be exactly who Patricia had taught me to be, even if that freedom came at a significant professional cost. "I'll need a few minutes to gather my personal belongings," I said, maintaining the professional tone that had been drummed into me over 18 months of corporate employment. "You'll have exactly 10 minutes, supervised by security," Rachel said coldly. "And any company property, including documents, files, or research materials, remains with Premier Analytics." I nodded, understanding that they were trying to limit my ability to take any evidence of their corruption with me. What they didn't understand was that the most important evidence wasn't in my desk drawer or computer files. It was on my phone, recorded during conversations I had witnessed over the past several weeks. Conversations that painted a very different picture of who was really violating company policies and ethical standards. The walk back to my cubicle was surreal, like moving through a world that had suddenly become foreign and hostile. Colleagues who had been friendly just hours earlier now avoided eye contact, their behavior suggesting that word of my termination had already spread through the corporate communication network that operated faster than any official announcement. Security arrived in the form of 2 professional guards who maintained respectful but firm supervision as I packed the few personal items that had made my workspace feel like home. My grandmother's framed photograph, the small succulent plant that Jennifer had given me for my birthday, the coffee mug with the University of Washington logo that had accompanied me through countless late nights and early mornings. Patricia appeared at my cubicle just as I was closing the small cardboard box that contained the remnants of my corporate life. Her presence drew stares from nearby colleagues and what appeared to be meaningful glances between the security guards, but she ignored the attention and focused entirely on me. "Emma," she said quietly, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and sadness that made my throat tighten with emotion. "I heard what happened. I'm so sorry that you got caught up in this situation." "I'm not sorry," I replied honestly, surprised by how much I meant it. "You taught me that integrity isn't something you can compromise when it becomes inconvenient. Standing up for you was standing up for everything I believe in." She smiled, and for a moment the stress and worry that had been weighing on her seemed to lift. "You're going to be fine, Emma. More than fine. You're going to build something meaningful and authentic, and you're going to do it with the kind of principles that will sustain you through whatever challenges come your way." One of the security guards cleared his throat, indicating that my time was up, and my escort to the exit was about to begin. Patricia squeezed my hand briefly, a gesture of support and affection that would have been considered inappropriate by the same people who were trying to destroy her career for caring too much about the people she worked with. The elevator ride down from the 32nd floor was a descent through everything I had worked to achieve and everything I was choosing to leave behind. The security guards were professional but impersonal, treating me like a potential threat rather than someone who had just sacrificed her career for a principle. The lobby that had welcomed me 18 months ago now felt like a checkpoint between my old life and whatever uncertain future awaited me outside. The Seattle street outside Premier Analytics felt different somehow, as if the city itself had changed during the few hours I had spent upstairs watching my professional world collapse. The air was cleaner, the sounds were more authentic, and the people moving past me on the sidewalk seemed more real than the polished executives I had been working alongside for the past year and a half. I stood there for a moment, holding my small box of personal belongings and trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. I had been fired from my dream job for refusing to betray my mentor. I had chosen principle over profit, integrity over advancement, loyalty over career security. The rational part of my mind was already calculating the financial implications of unemployment and the professional challenges of finding new employment with a termination on my record. But the deeper part of my consciousness, the part that Patricia had nurtured and developed over months of mentorship and guidance, felt something unexpected: pride. I had faced the ultimate test of character and had chosen to be the person she had taught me to be. I had refused to compromise my values for professional advancement, and I had demonstrated the kind of loyalty that transcended corporate politics and strategic advantage. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Heard what happened? Coffee tomorrow? We need to talk. P." The message was brief and cryptic, but I understood immediately that Patricia had found a way to communicate outside the surveillance network that now surrounded both of us. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't be facing it alone. The walk to my car provided time to absorb the reality of my new situation. I was unemployed, potentially unemployable in my chosen industry, and facing an uncertain future that bore no resemblance to the carefully planned career trajectory I had been following just that morning. But I was also free from the moral compromise that had been slowly suffocating my sense of professional purpose, liberated from an organization that valued compliance over conscience, and reconnected with the principles that had originally drawn me to business as a way of making a positive impact in the world. As I drove through Seattle's afternoon traffic, I thought about the coffee vendor at Pike Place Market and his observation about difficult choices defining who we really are. The choice I had made that morning would indeed define me, not just professionally but personally, for years to come. I had chosen to be someone who could be trusted, someone who honored the relationships that mattered, someone who understood that success without integrity was just an elaborate form of failure. The uncertainty was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again, like the person who had walked into Premier Analytics 18 months ago with dreams of building something meaningful and authentic. The corporate world had tried to change me, to mold me into someone who would sacrifice principles for advancement. But Patricia's influence had been stronger than their pressure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult conversations, but tonight, I would sleep with the knowledge that I had chosen to be the person Patricia had seen potential in, the person she had invested her time and energy in developing, the person she had trusted to carry forward the values that made business more than just a game of profit and loss. The manila folder was still sitting on my coffee table when I arrived home, but it no longer held any power over me. Its promises had been revealed as empty, its threats had been faced and overcome, and its presence in my life had served its purpose as a test of character that I had somehow managed to pass. Oliver greeted me with his usual feline enthusiasm, completely unconcerned with my employment status or professional prospects. His unconditional affection reminded me that there were relationships in life that transcended corporate politics and career ambitions. Relationships built on genuine care rather than strategic advantage. Relationships that would endure long after the current crisis had been resolved. I spent the evening on my balcony, looking out over the Seattle skyline, and thinking about the future I was now free to create. The Premier Analytics building was visible in the distance, its windows glowing with the light of people working late to advance careers and serve corporate objectives that now seemed foreign and unappealing. I felt no regret about leaving that world behind, only curiosity about what kind of world I would build to replace it. The recording app on my phone contained hours of conversations that painted a very different picture of the ethical violations at Premier Analytics than the one Marcus Sullivan and his colleagues were trying to construct. Tomorrow's coffee meeting with Patricia would determine how best to use that evidence. But tonight, it was enough to know that the truth had been preserved and would eventually find its way into the light. The weight of uncertainty was balanced by the lightness of moral clarity. I had chosen loyalty over advancement, integrity over profit, principle over pragmatism. The consequences were significant, and the challenges ahead were daunting, but I was facing them as someone I could respect, someone whose reflection I could meet in the mirror without flinching, someone who had honored the trust placed in her, by a mentor who had risked her own position to help me become the person I was meant to be. The manila folder remained unopened, a symbol of roads not taken and compromises not made. A reminder that some opportunities are meant to be refused and some prices are too high to pay. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities and different challenges. But tonight, I was content to sit with Oliver on my small balcony, watching the city lights and knowing that I had chosen to be exactly who Patricia had taught me to be. The coffee shop Patricia had chosen for our meeting was a small, independent place in the Fremont neighborhood, far enough from Premier Analytics to avoid any chance encounters with former colleagues and intimate enough to allow for the kind of conversation that required absolute privacy. The morning rain that was so characteristic of Seattle had given way to pale sunshine that filtered through the large windows, casting everything in the kind of soft light that made difficult conversations feel slightly more manageable. I arrived, 10 minutes early, partly from nervous energy and partly from a lifetime of punctuality training that had survived my recent termination intact. The barista, a young woman with intricate tattoos covering her arms and the kind of genuine smile that seemed to be standard equipment in Seattle's independent coffee culture, prepared my usual order with the care and attention that corporate coffee chains had long since abandoned in favor of efficiency and profit margins. Patricia walked through the door exactly on time, her punctuality as reliable as sunrise, and her professional composure intact despite everything that had happened over the past week. She moved through the coffee shop with the same confident grace that had first impressed me 18 months ago, but now I could see the toll that recent events had taken on her. The stress lines around her eyes were more pronounced, her shoulders carried tension that hadn't been there before, and her smile, while genuine, required visible effort to maintain. She ordered her coffee with the same careful consideration she brought to every decision, engaging the barista in the kind of brief but meaningful conversation that had always characterized her approach to human interaction. Even under siege from corporate investigators and facing the potential destruction of her career, she remained fundamentally herself, someone who treated every person with respect and genuine interest, someone who understood that relationships were built through countless small moments of authentic connection. We found a table in the back corner of the coffee shop, positioned to allow us privacy while keeping sightlines clear to ensure we weren't being followed or monitored. The paranoia felt absurd and necessary in equal measure, a reminder that what had started as routine corporate politics had escalated into something more serious and potentially dangerous for both our professional futures. "Emma," Patricia began, her voice carrying the warmth and concern that had made her such an effective mentor. "I need you to know how sorry I am that you got caught up in this situation. What they did to you was unconscionable, and I blame myself for not seeing it coming soon enough to protect you." I shook my head, understanding that she was trying to take responsibility for something that was entirely beyond her control. "You couldn't have known they would try to use me against you. And even if you had, it wouldn't have changed my decision. What they asked me to do was wrong, and refusing was the only choice I could live with." She smiled, and for the first time, in days, it seemed effortless and genuine. "That response tells me everything I need to know about the person you've become. When I first started working with you, I saw potential, but I wasn't sure if you had the strength to maintain your principles when they were tested. Yesterday proved that you do. The validation meant more to me than any performance review or promotion could have." In a world where success was measured primarily by financial advancement and career trajectory, having someone whose opinion I respected confirm that I had made the right choice provided an anchor of certainty in an otherwise turbulent situation. "What happens now?" I asked, genuinely uncertain about how to navigate unemployment and the potential blacklisting that Rachel Kim had threatened during my termination meeting. Patricia leaned forward, her expression shifting from personal concern to professional focus. "Now we tell the truth. All of it. The recordings you mentioned in your text message are just the beginning. I've been documenting everything for months, and what I've discovered goes far beyond the investigation they're conducting into my supposed ethical violations." She pulled a tablet from her bag and opened a file that contained what appeared to be a comprehensive dossier of evidence. Screenshots of emails, photographs of documents, timestamps of meetings, and detailed notes about conversations and decisions that painted a picture of systematic corruption at Premier Analytics that was breathtaking in its scope and audacity. Marcus Sullivan isn't just trying to eliminate employees who don't fit his vision of corporate culture, she continued, her voice carrying the controlled anger of someone who had been building a case for justice rather than revenge. He's been systematically manipulating client relationships, research results, and financial reporting to create the appearance of growth and innovation while actually destroying the authentic competitive advantages that made Premier Analytics successful. In the first place, the evidence she showed me was damning and comprehensive. Email chains that revealed deliberate misrepresentation of research findings to clients, budget manipulations that disguised declining performance as strategic investment, and personnel decisions based on personal loyalty rather than professional competence. The investigation into Patricia's supposed ethical violations was revealed as a smokescreen designed to eliminate the one person with enough knowledge and integrity to expose the real problems plaguing the organization. The clients, they claim, I've developed inappropriate relationships with are actually the ones providing the most detailed feedback about how Marcus's new policies are destroying the value they expect from our services, she explained, pointing to a series of client communications that told a story completely different from the official narrative being constructed by the executive team. They trust me enough to be honest about their dissatisfaction, which makes me a threat to the fiction that everything is proceeding according to plan. I studied the evidence with growing amazement and horror, understanding that my termination was a minor casualty in a much larger war between authentic professional values and the kind of corporate corruption that had become endemic in too many organizations. Patricia hadn't just been protecting me during our mentoring relationship. She had been protecting the clients, the research integrity, and the fundamental principles that made Premier Analytics worth working for in the first place. How long have you known about all this? I asked, overwhelmed by the complexity and scope of what she had uncovered. I started noticing problems about 6 months ago, she replied, scrolling through documents that showed a timeline of increasing corruption and ethical decay. Small things at first. Research conclusions that didn't match the data, client feedback that was being ignored or suppressed, personnel decisions that seemed based on political considerations rather than professional merit. But when I started documenting everything, systematically, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The coffee shop around us continued its normal rhythm of morning customers and casual conversations, providing a surreal backdrop for revelations that could potentially destroy one of Seattle's most prominent consulting firms. Students worked on laptops, business people conducted informal meetings, and retirees read newspapers while we discussed evidence that would reshape the professional landscape of our industry. Why didn't you go to the authorities months ago? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Patricia's expression grew sad and frustrated, because I hoped I could fix it from the inside. I believed that if I could document the problems comprehensively enough, if I could present irrefutable evidence of what was happening, the board of directors would step in and correct course before irreparable damage was done to the company's reputation and client relationships. She pulled up another file that showed her attempts to communicate her concerns through official channels, each report more detailed and urgent than the last, each response more dismissive and hostile. The board had not only ignored her warnings, they had actively participated in suppressing her research and undermining her credibility within the organization. That's when I realized that the corruption wasn't limited to Marcus Sullivan and his immediate team, she continued, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had watched an organization she cared about destroy itself from within. The board was either complicit in the deception or so disconnected from actual operations that they were willing to trust his assurances rather than investigate the evidence. I thought about my own experience over the past week, how quickly I had been isolated and pressured once I refused to participate in their scheme. The systematic nature of their approach suggested that they had done this before, that other employees had faced similar choices and either capitulated or been eliminated to protect the secrets that were now spread across Patricia's tablet. What about the other people who worked with you? Did anyone else try to speak up? Patricia's smile was bitter. 3 people over the past year. 2 were transferred to positions where they had no access to sensitive information, and 1 was terminated for performance issues that materialized only after he started asking uncomfortable questions about research methodologies. The pattern was clear and chilling. Premier Analytics had become an organization where loyalty was measured by willingness to ignore ethical violations, where success required complicity in systematic deception, and where the most principled employees were systematically eliminated to protect a culture of corruption that served only the financial interests of senior executives. The recordings you made are crucial pieces of this puzzle, Patricia said, returning her focus to our immediate situation. They provide real-time evidence of the pressure tactics and intimidation strategies they use to maintain control over employees who might otherwise speak up about what they're witnessing. I pulled out my phone and played portions of the conversations I had recorded, watching Patricia's expression grow more grim as she heard Marcus Sullivan, Rachel Kim, and James Mitchell reveal their true motivations and methods. The casual way they discussed destroying her career, their assumption that I could be bought with promises of advancement, and their complete lack of concern for the ethical implications of their actions painted a picture of moral bankruptcy. That was even worse than the financial corruption she had been documenting. "This gives us everything we need," she said, after listening to the most damaging segments of the recordings. "Combined with the documentation I've been gathering, we have enough evidence to trigger federal investigations into financial fraud, client deception, and employee intimidation. Marcus Sullivan's little empire is about to come crashing down." The prospect of justice was satisfying, but I found myself more interested in what would happen after the current leadership was removed and the organization was forced to confront the consequences of its ethical failures. What about Premier Analytics itself? What about the employees who weren't part of the corruption? What about the clients who deserve better than what they've been getting? Patricia closed her tablet and leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful and determined. That's the real question, isn't it? Do we focus on punishment for the people who created this mess? Or do we focus on building something better, for the people who deserve authentic professional service? She had been thinking about this dilemma for months, weighing the satisfaction of bringing down corrupt executives against the more challenging, but ultimately more meaningful work of creating an alternative that embodied the principles Premier Analytics had abandoned. The choice between destruction and construction, between revenge and renewal, between looking backward toward justice and looking forward toward possibility. I've been offered positions at 3 different consulting firms over the past month, she continued, all of them eager to acquire my client relationships and research methodologies. But I keep thinking about what you said during your termination meeting, about needing to find a different industry if this one doesn't value integrity and authentic relationships. The idea that had been forming in my mind over the past week suddenly crystallized into something concrete and exciting. What if we didn't find a different industry? What if we created a different kind of company within this industry? Something that proved you could be successful while maintaining the principles that Marcus Sullivan thinks are outdated and unprofitable? Patricia's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm I had seen during our best mentoring sessions, when we had moved beyond routine problem-solving into the realm of genuine innovation and creative thinking. You're talking about starting our own firm, building something from the ground up that embodies everything we believe about authentic business relationships and ethical research practices. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small to contain. The possibilities we were discussing. A consulting firm that prioritized long-term client relationships over short-term profits, that valued employee development over employee exploitation, that measured success by the positive impact created rather than the maximum revenue extracted. It was audacious and terrifying and absolutely necessary in an industry that had lost its way. "I have enough savings to cover startup costs for about 6 months," Patricia said, her voice carrying the excitement of someone who had found a solution that satisfied both her principles and her ambitions. "And I have relationships with clients who are already expressing dissatisfaction with Premier Analytics and looking for alternatives that offer more authentic service. I thought about my own financial situation, significantly more precarious after my termination, but not impossible, to manage with careful planning and creative problem-solving. I have enough in my emergency fund to cover my personal expenses for about 4 months, and I have skills that would be valuable in a startup environment, even if I can't contribute much capital." The conversation shifted from theoretical possibility to practical planning with breathtaking speed. Patricia had been thinking about this option for weeks, developing business models and financial projections while officially working to expose the corruption at Premier Analytics. She pulled up another file on her tablet that showed detailed plans for a consulting firm that could compete effectively with established players while maintaining the ethical standards that had been abandoned by too many organizations in the industry. "The key insight is that authentic relationships and ethical practices aren't obstacles to success," she explained, scrolling through market analysis and competitive positioning studies. "They're competitive advantages that have been undervalued by executives who think short-term financial engineering is more important than long-term value creation." Her research showed that clients were increasingly frustrated with consulting firms that prioritized their own profits over client outcomes, that promised innovative solutions while delivering recycled methodologies, that assigned junior staff to do the work while senior partners collected the fees. There was a genuine market opportunity for a firm that offered something different, something better, something that treated consulting as a professional service rather than a financial extraction mechanism. "What about the legal implications of competing with Premier Analytics?" I asked, remembering Rachel Kim's threats about non-compete clauses and industry blacklisting. Patricia smiled with the confidence of someone who had already consulted with employment attorneys and knew exactly where she stood legally. "My contract specifically excludes research methodologies I developed independently, and it has no enforceable non-compete provisions for work that doesn't directly compete with Premier Analytics core services. As for you, your termination actually protects you from most potential legal challenges, since they can't claim you're violating company loyalty when they've already established that you're no longer part of the company." The irony was perfect. By firing me for disloyalty, they had freed me to compete with them directly without legal consequences. By framing Patricia's ethical concerns as violations worthy of investigation, they had created the documentation that would protect her intellectual property and client relationships. Their attempt to eliminate threats to their corrupt system had actually created the foundation for a legitimate alternative. We spent the next 2 hours developing a business plan that was both ambitious and realistic, drawing on Patricia's 18 years of industry experience and my fresh perspective on contemporary market dynamics. The firm would start small, focusing on clients who valued authentic relationships and innovative research over prestigious brand names and established market presence. We would grow organically, adding team members who shared our values rather than expanding rapidly through acquisition. And consolidation? "We'll need a name that reflects our approach," Patricia said as we began discussing practical implementation details. "Something that signals authenticity and innovation without sounding grandiose or corporate." The name came to me suddenly, inspired by the conversation we were having and the principles that would guide our work. Meridian Insights. A meridian is a line of longitude that helps navigate the globe, and insights are what clients really need from consultants. Navigation and understanding, not manipulation and extraction. Patricia nodded enthusiastically, testing the name and finding it both memorable and meaningful. Meridian Insights. I like it. It suggests precision, guidance, and the kind of global perspective that clients need in an increasingly complex business environment. The business plan was taking shape with remarkable speed, partly because Patricia had been thinking about these concepts for months, and partly because our shared values made decision-making straightforward. We would prioritize client outcomes over internal politics, employee development over cost minimization, and long-term sustainability over short-term profit maximization. The principles that had made our mentoring relationship successful would become the foundation for a consulting firm that proved ethics and effectiveness were not contradictory goals. "When do we start?" I asked, feeling a mixture of excitement and terror that I recognized as the emotional signature of important life decisions. "As soon as we finish exposing what's happening at Premier Analytics," Patricia replied, her expression shifting back to the serious focus required for the justice phase of our plan. "The evidence we have is too important to ignore, and the people still working there deserve protection from the kind of pressure you experienced. But once we've fulfilled our obligation to tell the truth about what we witnessed, we're free to build something better." She had already made contact with investigative journalists at the Seattle Times and attorneys who specialized in corporate whistleblower cases. The evidence would be presented systematically and comprehensively, ensuring that the full scope of the corruption would be exposed, and that the people responsible would face appropriate consequences. But the real victory would be proving that there was a better way to conduct business, that success and integrity were not mutually exclusive, that the cynicism driving so much corporate behavior was neither necessary nor profitable in the long term. The coffee shop was beginning to fill with the lunch crowd as our conversation moved toward concrete next steps and immediate action items. Students and workers and retirees continued their normal routines while we planned what felt like a revolution. In miniature, a small but significant challenge to the assumption that business success required moral compromise. "Are you ready for this?" Patricia asked as we prepared to leave, her expression serious but hopeful. Starting a consulting firm is difficult under the best circumstances, and we'll be doing it while navigating the fallout from exposing corruption at one of Seattle's most prominent professional services companies. It's going to be challenging and uncertain, and probably terrifying. I thought about everything that had led to this moment, from my nervous first day at Premier Analytics to my principled termination just 1 week ago. The path had been neither straight nor predictable, but each decision had been guided by the values Patricia had taught me and the integrity that had proven more valuable than any corporate advancement. Now I had the opportunity to build something that embodied those values from the beginning, to create a professional home for people who believed that doing the right thing was not just personally satisfying, but also strategically intelligent. "I'm ready," I said, surprised by how certain I felt despite the obvious risks and uncertainties ahead. "I'm ready to build something that proves you can be successful without compromising your principles, something that shows younger professionals that integrity and achievement aren't contradictory goals." We left the coffee shop with plans to meet again the following day to begin the formal process of exposing the corruption at Premier Analytics and launching Meridian Insights. The Seattle afternoon was crisp and clear, the kind of weather that made the city feel full of possibility and promise. The Space Needle stood against the blue sky like a symbol of human ambition and creativity, reminding me that the most meaningful achievements often began with someone brave enough to imagine something better and determined enough to make it real. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of our own small office in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, looking out at Elliott Bay while preparing for a client presentation that would secure Meridian Insights' position as a legitimate competitor in the Seattle consulting market. The view was different from the one I had enjoyed on the 32nd floor of Premier Analytics, but it was ours, earned through authentic relationships and ethical practices rather than political maneuvering and moral compromise. Patricia walked into the conference room carrying coffee from our favorite independent shop and wearing the kind of satisfied smile that comes from building something meaningful from nothing. The Pierce Industries team just confirmed for this afternoon. They're ready to sign a 12-month contract that will put us ahead of our first-year revenue projections. The success felt different from anything I had experienced in corporate environments. Instead of advancement within someone else's system, We had created our own system based on principles we believed in. Instead of competing for recognition, within a hierarchy designed to reward compliance over creativity, we had built a space where innovation and integrity were not just encouraged, but required. Any word from the Attorney General's office about the Premier Analytics investigation? I asked, though I already knew from Patricia's expression that the news was positive. Marcus Sullivan was indicted yesterday on charges of financial fraud and client deception. Rachel Kim and James Mitchell are cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences. The board of directors has been replaced entirely, and the new leadership is implementing ethics policies that look remarkably similar to the recommendations we made in our whistleblower report. The justice was satisfying, but the real victory was what we had built while the legal process ground through its necessary procedures. Meridian Insights had grown from a coffee shop conversation to a thriving consultancy with 12 employees, all of them people who had chosen principle over politics, authenticity over advancement, meaningful work over maximum profit. We had proved that the values Patricia had taught me weren't just personally fulfilling, they were professionally successful. The recording app on my phone still contained the conversations that had helped bring down a corrupt organization, but it also contained newer recordings, client testimonials about the quality of our work, employee interviews about the satisfaction of working in an ethical environment, and strategic planning sessions where we discussed how to maintain our principles while growing our impact. Some stories end with revenge, others end with justice. The best ones end with the creation of something better than what came before. Something that proves the cynics wrong and gives hope to the idealists who refuse to accept that success requires moral compromise. Meridian Insights was our proof. That loyalty to the right principles was the foundation of authentic success. That refusing to frame your mentor could lead to building something more meaningful than any corporate promotion. And that recording everything sometimes captures not just corruption, but also the conversations that change the world. One ethical decision at a time. 3 years had passed since that pivotal morning when I walked out of Premier Analytics with nothing but a cardboard box and my principles intact. Today, I stood in the gleaming boardroom of Meridian Insights, watching the Seattle skyline transform under an autumn sunset, while our team prepared for the presentation that would mark our transition from promising startup to established industry leader. The view from our 21st floor office in the Columbia Center was spectacular. But what made it truly meaningful was knowing that every square foot of this space had been earned through authentic relationships and unwavering ethical standards. The conference table was surrounded by faces that told the story of what could happen when talented people were given the freedom to do their best work without compromising their values. Sarah Martinez, our head of client relations, had left a prestigious firm after they pressured her to inflate billable hours and misrepresent project timelines. David Kim, our research director, had been pushed out of his previous position for refusing to alter data to support predetermined conclusions. Jennifer Walsh, who had been my cubicle neighbor at Premier Analytics, now led our technology innovation team after discovering that her former employer was using outdated methodologies while charging clients for cutting-edge analysis. Each person in this room had faced their own moment of choice between advancement and integrity, and each had chosen to build something better rather than accept something corrupt. Together, we had created not just a successful consulting firm, but a proof of concept that ethical business practices were not obstacles to overcome, but competitive advantages to leverage. Patricia entered the boardroom carrying the latest quarterly reports and wearing the kind of smile that came from seeing a vision become reality through hard work and principled decision-making. As our CEO and co-founder, she had transformed from mentor to partner to leader. But she had never lost the qualities that made her an exceptional teacher and guide. Her approach to leadership was the same as her approach to mentorship: authentic, supportive, and focused on helping others reach their full potential. The numbers are even better than we projected, she announced, distributing copies of the financial summary that would be shared with our board of advisors. We're looking at 43% growth over last year, with client retention rates that are unprecedented in our industry. More importantly, our employee satisfaction scores continue to rank in the top 1% of professional services firms nationwide. The success was gratifying, but what made it extraordinary was the way we had achieved it. Every metric that traditional consulting firms struggled with became a strength when approached with genuine concern for all stakeholders, rather than exclusive focus on profit maximization. Clients stayed with us longer because we delivered results that served their actual needs rather than our revenue targets. Employees performed better because they felt valued as complete human beings rather than disposable resources. Innovation flourished because people felt safe proposing creative solutions without fear of political retaliation. The Hansen Corporation presentation is in 2 hours, Sarah reported, referring to the potential client meeting that could establish us as serious competitors for contracts traditionally reserved for the industry's most established players. Their team includes 3 executives who specifically requested to work with us after hearing about our approach to stakeholder engagement and sustainable business practices. Hansen Corporation represented more than just another client opportunity. They were a Fortune 500 company whose decision to work with Meridian Insights would signal to the entire industry that authenticity and ethics were not just personally satisfying choices but strategically intelligent ones. Their project involved developing a 5-year sustainability strategy that would affect thousands of employees and millions of customers, the kind of high-stakes work that required both technical expertise and genuine commitment to creating positive outcomes. Emma will be leading the presentation, Patricia continued, with David providing research support and Sarah handling the relationship management components. This is exactly the kind of integrated approach that distinguishes us from firms that compartmentalize client service into competing departments. The confidence she expressed in my abilities still amazed me sometimes, though I had long since proven capable of handling complex client relationships and strategic consulting projects. The nervous junior analyst who had struggled to connect with clients during her first months at Premier Analytics had evolved into someone who could walk into boardrooms with genuine authority and authentic expertise. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but it had been built on the foundation Patricia had provided, and the principles we had chosen to uphold, even when doing so, required significant personal sacrifice. What's the latest on the Premier Analytics situation? Jennifer asked, referring to the ongoing legal proceedings that had become a case study in corporate ethics programs at business schools across the country. Patricia's expression grew serious but satisfied. Marcus Sullivan was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison last week. Rachel Kim received probation and community service, and James Mitchell was ordered to pay substantial fines and restitution. More importantly, the new leadership at Premier Analytics has implemented comprehensive reforms that should prevent similar corruption from taking root in the future. The justice had been slower than we might have preferred, but it had been thorough and comprehensive. The recordings I had made during those tense conversations had provided crucial evidence that corroborated Patricia's documentation and established a clear pattern of systematic ethical violations. The investigation had revealed corruption that extended far beyond what we had initially suspected, including client billing fraud, research manipulation, and employee intimidation that had affected dozens of people over several years. The best part, David added with a grin, is that 3 of their former clients have already signed contracts with us, and their new ethics officer specifically cited our whistleblower report as a model for the kind of principled leadership they want to encourage. The irony was delicious but not entirely surprising. The courage required to speak truth to power often created exactly the kind of reputation that attracted clients who valued integrity and authenticity. Our willingness to sacrifice personal advancement for ethical principles had become a competitive advantage in a market where trust was increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. Speaking of former Premier Analytics connections, Sarah said, pulling out her phone to check a recent message. I just heard from Tom Rodriguez in their research department. He's been working with the new leadership to implement the ethics training program, and he wanted us to know that our case study is being used as an example of how to handle ethical dilemmas with integrity and professionalism. The recognition felt surreal sometimes, knowing that my decision to refuse Marcus Sullivan's corrupt bargain had become a teaching tool for other professionals facing similar choices. Business schools were incorporating our story into their curricula. Professional associations were using it in ethics training programs, and industry publications had written extensive analyses of how principled decision-making could create both personal satisfaction and business success. "How does it feel to be famous for doing the right thing?" Jennifer asked with a teasing smile that reminded me of our conversations in the Premier Analytics break room. "It feels like validation that the things Patricia taught me about integrity and authentic relationships weren't just idealistic concepts, but practical strategies for building meaningful success," I replied honestly. "And it feels like responsibility to keep proving that you don't have to choose between doing well and doing good." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of our newest team member, Alexandra Chen, a recent graduate from the University of Washington's business program who had specifically sought us out after reading about our approach to employee development and client service. She represented the next generation of professionals who had grown up expecting authenticity from their employers and were unwilling to accept traditional corporate compromises between values and advancement. "The Hansen team just arrived in the lobby," Alexandra reported with the nervous excitement of someone still adjusting to the high-stakes world of corporate consulting. "Their CEO mentioned that they've been following our work for months and are particularly interested in our methodology for stakeholder engagement and sustainable business strategy." The moment had arrived to demonstrate that the principles we championed in interviews and case studies could be applied effectively to the most challenging business problems facing contemporary organizations. Hansen Corporation was struggling with exactly the kind of complex issues that required both technical expertise and genuine commitment to creating positive outcomes for all stakeholders, rather than maximizing short-term profits at the expense of long-term sustainability. We made our way to the main conference room, passing through office space that reflected our values in its design and atmosphere. Open workspaces encouraged collaboration and communication. Plants and natural light created an environment that supported both productivity and well-being, and artwork from local artists reminded everyone that business success should contribute to community flourishing rather than individual enrichment at the expense of broader social good. The Hansen Corporation team was impressive in both their professional credentials and their genuine interest in finding solutions that would serve multiple constituencies effectively. CEO Michael Thompson had built his reputation on sustainable business practices and ethical leadership. CFO Lisa Park was known for innovative approaches to stakeholder capitalism, and Operations Director James Wilson had been recruited specifically to implement strategies that balanced profitability with social responsibility. "We've been watching Meridian Insights for over a year," Michael began after introductions and preliminary pleasantries were completed. "Your approach to consulting represents exactly the kind of partnership we're looking for as we develop our next 5-year strategic plan. We need advisors who understand that sustainable success requires authentic relationships with employees, customers, suppliers, and communities, rather than extractive relationships that maximize short-term profits while creating long-term problems." The alignment between their values and ours was immediately apparent, creating the kind of foundation for authentic collaboration that made complex projects both more enjoyable and more effective. This was what Patricia had always taught me about business relationships. When the fundamental values were shared, the technical challenges became opportunities for creative problem-solving rather than sources of conflict and frustration. Our methodology is built on the premise that stakeholder engagement should be genuine rather than performative, I explained, opening the presentation that would outline our approach to their sustainability strategy. "We start by listening carefully to understand the actual needs and concerns of all parties affected by business decisions. Then we develop solutions that create value for everyone, rather than transferring value from some stakeholders to others. The next 90 minutes flew by as we demonstrated our research capabilities, relationship management strategies, and implementation methodologies through case studies and interactive discussions. The Hansen team asked probing questions that revealed their sophisticated understanding of both business strategy and ethical leadership, confirming that they were exactly the kind of clients who would benefit most from our approach and contribute most to our continued growth and development. "This is exactly what we hope to find," Lisa said, as the formal presentation concluded and conversation shifted to potential collaboration details. "You're proposing to help us build sustainable competitive advantages through authentic stakeholder relationships, rather than trying to engineer short-term financial improvements that would create long-term strategic vulnerabilities." The contract negotiation that followed was refreshingly straightforward, partly because our values were aligned and partly because both organizations prioritized relationship building over tactical advantage seeking. Instead of the adversarial process that characterized many business negotiations, this felt like collaborative planning between partners who shared fundamental commitments to ethical practices and sustainable outcomes. "We'd like to begin with a 6-month pilot project focused on employee engagement and community relations," Michael proposed, outlining a scope of work that would allow both organizations to evaluate the partnership while creating immediate value for Hansen stakeholders. "If the results meet our expectations, we're prepared to expand the relationship to include strategic planning, operational optimization, and market development initiatives." The proposal represented not just significant revenue for Meridian insights but validation that our approach could scale to serve large organizations facing complex challenges. More importantly, it offered an opportunity to demonstrate that ethical business practices were not obstacles to growth, but catalysts for sustainable success that benefited everyone involved. "We accept," Patricia said simply, extending her hand, to seal an agreement that felt more like the beginning of a friendship than a traditional vendor-client relationship. "We look forward to helping you prove that doing the right thing is also the smart thing." As the Hansen team prepared to leave, Michael pulled me aside for a brief private conversation that would prove to be one of the most meaningful moments of my professional career. "I want you to know that your story was part of what convinced our board to seek out Meridian Insights," he said quietly. "The courage you showed in refusing to compromise your principles, even when it cost you personally, demonstrated exactly the kind of character we want in our strategic advisors. Business is ultimately about relationships between people, and we need partners who understand that trust is more valuable than any individual transaction." The recognition was humbling and energizing in equal measure. Confirmation that the choice I had made in Marcus Sullivan's conference room 3 years earlier continued to create positive ripple effects in ways I could never have anticipated. The decision to stand by Patricia rather than advance my own career had led not just to personal satisfaction, but to professional opportunities that were more meaningful and more fulfilling than anything I could have achieved through ethical compromise. Evening fell over Seattle as our team gathered in the conference room to celebrate the successful presentation and plan the implementation of our newest major project. The city lights twinkled below us like stars, each one representing someone's life and work and dreams, all of them connected in the vast network of human relationships that made commerce possible and meaningful. 3 years ago, Emma and I were sitting in a coffee shop in Fremont, planning what felt like an impossible dream, Patricia said, raising her glass in a toast to the journey that had brought us to this moment. "Tonight, we're sitting in our own boardroom, having just secured a contract that will establish us as legitimate competitors to the industry's most established players. The transformation has been remarkable, but the principles that guided us from the beginning remain unchanged." The toast was to more than just business success. It was to the validation of values that skeptics had dismissed as naive, to the vindication of choices that critics had called impractical, and to the demonstration that integrity and achievement were not contradictory goals, but complementary strategies for creating sustainable value in an interconnected world. "What's next?" Alexandra asked, her question reflecting both curiosity about our strategic direction and eagerness to contribute to continued growth and impact. "We keep proving that you can build something extraordinary when you refuse to compromise your principles," I replied, looking around the table at faces that represented the future of ethical business practice. "We keep showing younger professionals that they don't have to choose between success and integrity, and we keep demonstrating that authentic relationships create competitive advantages that can't be replicated through financial engineering or political manipulation." The conversation that followed stretched late into the evening, covering everything from expansion strategies and hiring plans to industry trends and social responsibility initiatives. But underneath all the business planning was a deeper discussion about values and purpose, about the kind of world we wanted to help create through our professional choices and personal commitments. As I finally prepared to leave the office that night, I found myself standing alone in the conference room, looking out at the Seattle skyline and reflecting on the journey that had brought me from nervous junior analyst to confident business leader. The premier analytics building was visible in the distance, its windows dark except for the security lighting that gave it a ghostly appearance against the night sky. 3 years ago, that building had represented everything I thought I wanted: prestige, security, advancement within an established organization that commanded respect in the business community. Tonight, it looked like a monument to compromise and corruption, a reminder of the cost of choosing expedience over principle and short-term advantage over sustainable value creation. The recording app on my phone still contained those crucial conversations that had helped bring down a corrupt organization and launch a movement toward more ethical business practices. But it also contained newer recordings, client testimonials about the impact of our work, employee interviews about the satisfaction of working in an authentic environment, and strategic planning sessions where we discussed how to maintain our principles while expanding our influence. Patricia appeared beside me, following my gaze toward the distant building where our professional lives had nearly been destroyed by people who mistook cynicism for sophistication and manipulation for strategy. "Any regrets?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Only that it took me so long to understand that the choice between integrity and advancement was a false dilemma," I replied honestly. "You tried to teach me that authentic relationships and ethical practices were competitive advantages, but I didn't fully believe it until I saw what we could build when we refused to compromise our values." She smiled, and in that expression, I saw the satisfaction of a teacher whose student had not only learned the lessons, but had applied them to create something meaningful and lasting. The most important things are often the hardest to believe until you experience them yourself. You had to make your own choices and face your own consequences before you could truly understand that doing the right thing is not just personally satisfying, but strategically intelligent. The elevator ride down to the parking garage was a journey through the different phases of our shared professional evolution, each floor marking another step in the transformation from corporate employees to ethical entrepreneurs, from people who worked within someone else's system to people who had created their own system based on principles they believed in. As I drove home through Seattle's quiet streets, I thought about Alexandra and the other young professionals who were joining organizations like Meridian Insights because they refused to accept that success required moral compromise. They represented a generation that had grown up expecting authenticity from their employers and were creating new models of business success that proved ethics and effectiveness were not contradictory goals. The future felt bright and full of possibility, not just for our firm, but for an entire industry that was slowly learning that sustainable success required authentic relationships and genuine commitment to creating value for all stakeholders, rather than extracting maximum profit for shareholders. The cynics who claimed that business was inherently amoral were being proven wrong by organizations that demonstrated superior performance through superior values. My apartment felt like a sanctuary after the intensity of the day's presentations and celebrations. a quiet space where I could process the magnitude of what we had accomplished and plan for the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. Oliver greeted me with his usual feline enthusiasm, completely unconcerned with my professional achievements, but delighted to have his human home for the evening. The manila folder that had started this entire journey was long gone, but its symbolic significance remained as a reminder that some opportunities were meant to be refused, and some prices were too high to pay. The choice I had made in that conference room 3 years ago had led to consequences I could never have imagined, proving that courage in the face of corruption could create ripple effects that extended far beyond individual career decisions. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about the coffee vendor at Pike Place Market who had told me that difficult choices defined who we really were. He had been right in ways that neither of us could have anticipated at the time. The choice to refuse Marcus Sullivan's corrupt bargain had indeed defined me, not just as a professional, but as a person who understood that integrity was not a luxury to be abandoned when convenient, but a foundation upon which sustainable success could be built. The recording equipment was safely stored in my desk drawer, ready to document future conversations that might require evidence of ethical behavior or expose attempts at corruption and manipulation. But increasingly, the conversations being recorded were celebrations of authentic achievement and planning sessions for positive impact, rather than evidence gathering for whistleblower reports. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and fresh opportunities to prove that ethical business practices were not obstacles to overcome, but competitive advantages to leverage. Meridian Insights would continue growing and evolving, always guided by the principles that Patricia had taught me, and that I was now helping to teach the next generation of professionals who refused to accept that success required moral compromise. The story that had begun with a devastating betrayal in a corporate conference room had become a testament to the power of choosing principle over profit, integrity over advancement, and authentic relationships over strategic manipulation. It was proof that loyalty to the right values could create opportunities that were more meaningful and more sustainable than anything that could be achieved through ethical compromise. Some stories end with revenge, others end with justice. The best ones end with transformation, not just of individual lives, but of entire industries and communities. Our story was still being written, but each chapter proved that the cynics were wrong about the incompatibility of success and integrity, and that the idealists were right about the possibility of building something better than what came before. The future belonged to organizations like Meridian Insights and professionals like Alexandra Chen, people who understood that authentic success required authentic relationships, and that the most sustainable competitive advantages were built on trust, transparency, and genuine commitment to creating value for everyone, rather than extracting maximum profit from anyone. 3 years after walking out of Premier Analytics with nothing but a cardboard box and my principles intact, I had helped build something that proved those principles were not just personally satisfying, but professionally strategic. The choice to stand by my mentor had led to the opportunity to become a mentor myself, and the decision to refuse ethical compromise had created a platform for demonstrating that integrity and achievement were not contradictory goals, but complementary strategies for sustainable success. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.